Good evening and welcome, everyone. It's nice to have you here. I am Deborah Rumbaugh. I am the Superintendent of the Stanwood-Camano School District, and we have with us tonight Ryan Ovenell, who is our Deputy Superintendent. We are thrilled to spend a little bit of time together with you this evening, sharing some information about our upcoming levy. And at the end, if we have questions, we will be happy to take some questions. So let's just dive right in. I'm going to start off with some basic information about our district that you probably are familiar with, but there are a couple of things on here that are worth noting. First, we have 10 schools within the district. That's pretty well known. And we serve 4,700 students from preschool all the way through 12th grade. And of note, we employ 1,000 individuals in our district, and that includes our team of substitutes. And that makes us the largest employer in our community. And we'll talk a little bit later on about the implications of our levy on the large group of community members that we employ. So Ryan, you want to walk us through the next slide?
Sure, happy to. And just as a point, if there's any questions, we'll have time for questions at the end. And if you're online, you can enter them online as well. So this levy is a replacement levy. For us, it's our second largest source of revenue that comes into the district. And we'll talk later that it's about 16% of the revenue that we receive going forward. Another interesting piece to this is this replacement levy, in one form or another, used to be called M&O, now called EP&O, has been supported in the community for over 60 years, since 1964. So I think that that's an important point to emphasize, maybe the tradition behind this levy. Like Deborah said, we employ 1,000 individuals in the many facets of the district, whether it's in the classroom, supporting students, driving the buses, coaching our athletes. 1,000 individuals are employed by the district, and nearly 90% of our revenues come from or go to supporting those individuals. And one of the things that we're doing tonight and throughout the next couple of weeks, and we have been, is that we want to provide all the information that our community might need. We want to avoid the "if I had known" scenario. So after the election, if someone is to say, "if I had only known this about the information about the district or the levy, that would have been helpful." So that's one of the things that we're trying to do tonight.
Thank you. So let's start off by talking about what is going to be on the ballot in terms of the ask. So again, this is not a new tax, not a new levy. This is an ask of voters to approve a replacement for a levy that is expiring. And this particular levy, as you can see, makes up about 16% of our total budget. That is the red component of the diagram that you see here. And what you're really looking at is a breakdown of our major sources of revenue. So you can see the largest piece of this diagram shows that our state funding, which makes up 76% of our revenues, is the largest source of income for the school district. Then we get about 6% from the federal government. And that second portion, which Ryan had said is our second largest source of revenue, comes from local levies. One of the things that we like to talk about is what is in that 76%. And that is what the state defines as basic education. And many of us have heard over the recent years that the state fully funds basic education. And what the state means by that is that whatever they define as basic education, they have an obligation to fund. And loosely speaking, that 76% of funding funds a base model for things that happen for kids at the start of the day all the way to the end of the day. So things that might take place for students before school, after school, or ancillary to the school day, like a field trip or other type of experience, those are not considered basic education according to Washington State's definition. So those are not funded. The other component within that 76% that's important to note is that the state uses a mathematical model to determine the dollars that we're going to get for staffing. And the state doesn't have a way to look inside a district and see, oh, this district may need additional nurses or additional safety staff or extra teachers for any number of reasons. And so that is really where that 16% local dollars comes from. and the importance that it plays in our system. It bridges the gap between what the state gives us and what it actually costs to run a full day and a full experience for students.
Thanks. So we should talk about why levy funding is needed. And Deborah alluded to part of that just a moment ago in that it is needed to bridge the gap between what the state provides and the services that our community wants and expects and has been known to be historically part of the educational model in our community. So levy dollars help pay for staffing and operations. Those are things like sports, most of our safety personnel, our nurses, some of our nurses, our nursing staff, our teachers, of course, and our support personnel in the classroom. So those are some of the things that the levy dollars bridge the gap on. And it should be said that the levy would, if it's continued to be funded, if it's not funded, there would be a significant gap in that piece, and there would be significant reductions in the staff that are supported by the levy and the programs.
Thank you. And Ryan, a common question that we get asked is, well, what's going to be cut specifically? And really the best answer to that question right now is that everything is on the table. We would have to contract our budget by nearly 20%, and we would really have to take a look at every program, every person, and every offering that we have for students and families and make decisions. So the next biggest question is the money part. So we often get asked, well, what is the cost of the levy? So we always like to start out by just reminding our community that this is not a new tax. Excuse me, this is an ask to replace an existing levy. So what you're looking at here are a couple of different data points. One, you can see the total amount of the levy from 2019 to 2028. And so you can see in 2019, the ask from voters was $10 million, and you can see that that has increased slowly over time. And one of the reasons for that increase is the cost of living. So as it becomes more expensive to run schools, there are more dollars required. And the second reason for that increase over time is that we are serving more students. So our enrollment has continued to increase and is projected to continue to increase through 2028 and beyond. And so that's why you see that increase. What we also like to focus on are the figures and the dollar amounts that you see at the bottom of the screen. So you can see back in 2019, when we asked voters for $10 million, we assessed voters, or we levied voters, about $1.50 per $1,000 of their assessed value. And you can see as time went on that value, that rate rather went up. So went to $1.59 in 2020, down to $1.57 in 2021. And as we move through the years, you can see we're going to land in 2024 at about $1.42. So that is less than where we started in 2019, according to this graph. And again, a common question, well, why is that less? And we know that as there are more individuals in the community, there's more property in the community, more landowners, and there's more individuals contributing to the levy, so we all pay a little bit less. The good news is that we anticipate that the rate that we are asking of voters, that $1.42, will remain the same over the next 4 years. So we do not anticipate ever going back to that $1.50 or $1.59 rate. So that is something that we work very hard on to be sure that that rate is as low as possible for our voters.
Great. So this is a table we like to highlight, and it's just an example of some of the positions that we have and the funding for those positions. And go back to what Deborah had talked about earlier, in that there's a model for what the state allocates to us for different positions in the district, and then what we feel, what our community feels, and what we need in the district to staff our schools. And so you can see that there's some examples of the gap or the difference that the levy supports. Just to highlight a few, for instance, our nursing and health staff, the state funds our district at 4.3 FTE, we call it, full-time equivalent staff members across our district. We have a need for 9.8. That's because of the needs of our students that are in our schools. as well as what our community believes is essential for operating. Talk about custodians as well. 17.6 are funded. We we support 24.9 custodians in our district to keep our buildings our buildings operating and clean. I want to highlight student and staff safety. This seems like a big disparity to me. The state funds 0.8 FTE, full-time equivalent, staff and student safety positions. And you can see that our district, through the levy, has 9.2 staff members. So these are staff like our school resource officer, our school security officer in the high school, our crossing guards, our student supervision employees. And one note that is, if we needed to reduce these positions because of a lack of funding, for instance, the school resource officer, we'd be on a wait list in the county to get a school resource officer back in the district on the order of years. So just some intricacies within this staffing model that we see with what the levy funds.
And Ryan, one interesting thing on this chart too is if you look at the very bottom, that's our athletic and coaches. So if you think about that definition of basic education that I talked about a few slides ago, the state does not consider our athletic programs as part of basic education, and they are not funded at all through our state allocation. And so we employ 106 individuals to support all of our athletic programs. And as you can see, every one of those 106 positions are funded through the levy. So it's notable in this slide in particular, that gap between what we're allocated versus what we need. And again, without that levy funds, all of these positions and more are at jeopardy. So we'd like to really touch on where the money goes. And it's important to us that we communicate that as clearly as possible to our community. So you can see in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, 58% of levy dollars are funding regular education, regular instruction in the classroom. And we alluded to the fact that the state uses a mathematical model to determine how many teachers a district is going to get. And what we know is that amount of teachers does not fully fund the programs that we have in our high schools, our middle schools, and our elementary schools. So we want to be able to provide a multitude of electives and core classes and honors courses and electives so that kids can have really a rich experience. So we fund a significant amount of just our day-to-day through our levy. You can see in the upper left-hand corner, similarly in special education, we are, and not alone in this, but we are definitely underfunded in our special education. And that's not a new problem, but that certainly is something that our levy helps us attend to. And so we're talking about special education teachers, paraeducators that support kids and teachers in the classroom, and also our substitutes. The last one that's interesting that really kind of highlights what Ryan was talking about too is that definition of basic education is inadequate for what we need to be able to run our district day to day. So we do get allocated funds for support services, but when we think about the fact that the state provides us dollars to purchase food for meals and individuals to prepare meals, we are not allocated funds for individuals to serve meals, which is interesting. And so we pay for that through local dollars. Another one that is important to note is transportation. So we do get funded for transportation to move students to and from school. However, if we take students on a field trip or they attend an athletic event, those costs are not considered part of basic education, and the levy funds all of those transportation costs. And so if you add these dollars together, it is a significant part of our students' day-to-day experiences. Thanks.
This is an important slide because it comes back to what we are here for, and that's how public education benefits students. And so the first couple of bullets really talk about, you might have heard lately, the class size and enhancing levels of assistance from adults in the classroom. But the last three bullets in particular are things that we've touched on already previously tonight, and that's providing support and supervision for our students, supporting extracurricular activities in not only sports but activities, and enhancing the level of personal safety. And just going back to that gap between what is allocated by the state and what is provided by the levy, and how that benefits students.
So this is another common question, and this is what's going to happen to the amount I contribute to the levy as my property values go up and down. So what we're trying to demonstrate here is what the voters are approving is a fixed amount. So in this slide, you can see that the fulcrum of this teeter-totter is 16 million, and that demonstrates a fixed amount. So you can notice that as this teeter-totter moves up and down, that amount remains unchanged. So regardless of what happens to property values, the levy will never collect more than what the voters approve. And as property values increase, the amount that individual voters contribute to the levy decreases. Now, this is the opposite of what we know about property taxes. So property taxes, your property values increase, your taxes will increase. So if we set that aside and we think just about levies, the opposite happens. So when everyone's property values go up, there are more contributors to the levy, and we then all pay less. And of course, that certainly moves both ways. But common question, so we always like to make that distinction between your property taxes and a levy, that they behave oppositely, essentially.
Yeah, thanks. Another common question is, what is the difference between a bond and a levy? And an easy way to remember that is levies are for learning and bonds are for building. We had a bond in our community several years ago that built several new buildings, thankfully. And so that is exactly what bonds are for. They are for paying for capital facilities needs within the district. The result is what you see when you drive into this community. Bond dollars can only be used for capital improvements. On the other hand, levies are for learning, and levies provide money for educating students, providing staff for those students, and operating schools. So levies are for learning, bonds are for building.
So we also get asked questions about a levy that we ran in 2022. And so if you are familiar with that, we ran a levy twice in 2022, and that is not this levy. So we like to refer to this levy as the big levy. It's the replacement levy. It's that 16% of our revenues. We asked the community in 2022 to help us think about how we would maintain our facilities and maintain our technology infrastructure. And that levy did not pass. That was an ask for $10 million over 4 years. That levy has expired. Those taxes are not being collected from our community. And so those costs have either been absorbed into our general fund and required us to dip into savings, and or the support, the infrastructure, the services we are no longer providing to students and staff. And so we just like to be sure that our community members understand the difference between that levy. We're not rerunning that levy. This levy is not that levy. We're really focusing heavily on the replacement levy that supports really what happens for kids directly in the classroom.
Yeah, thank you. One last common question. How will the tax impact senior citizens on a fixed income? And so fortunately, there's a mechanism set up for this, and there's exemption programs for senior citizens and disabled persons within the community that can reduce the property tax bill that they may receive. So qualifying for these exemptions is based on age or disability, as well as residency and income. In both Island County and Snohomish County support these programs. In Island County, the minimum threshold for qualifying is $56,000 after deductions. And in Snohomish County, it's $75,000 for qualifying. So, and important to know that either of the county offices will help anyone that's interested in just exploring if this deduction is available for them readily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that it's important to note that the county's desire in having this program is to eliminate the tax burden on individuals that have fixed incomes to allow them to vote their conscience without having that burden. So we liked to get a little bit of information about where we compare relative to the rest of the state and relative to our peer districts. And so when we think about how do we stack up in terms of the levy and the rate that we are asking for voters, that $1.42 per $1,000, we asked our communications office to rank our districts across the state from the #1 district that had the highest rate to the 295th district that had the lowest rate. And we fall down at 189th across the state. So that's good to know for voters relative to where we land across the state. And then when we think about just Snohomish County, there are 14 school districts in Snohomish County. And if we did the same thing, we rank them from the district that has the highest rate levied to voters versus the one that has the lowest. We are third from the bottom, so that makes us 11 out of 14. So interesting information and good for us to know as we ask voters to consider, bringing this to the ballot and asking them to consider how they would vote on something like this.
We do have a little time for questions. I don't know if there's questions online, Evan. Okay.
Does the district have the ability to collect or assess a fee to the large developers to get their developments approved?
Yes, great question. So I'll start off, and if you want to add,
Sure.
Ryan, feel free. We do get questions about that, and really that falls under what we call impact fees. And currently, Island County does not have a mechanism to collect impact fees. Snohomish County does. And just like this question alluded to, when there are new builds, multifamily homes in the community that bring additional kids to the system, puts a strain essentially on the school district, and shouldn't we collect fees to help offset some of those? And the county has what we call a 3-pronged test that would allow us as a school district to collect those impact fees. And the very first prong we don't meet, and that is that we are essentially at capacity across the entire district. So loosely speaking, we would have to say we have no chairs in any of our buildings across the district, and because of that, we need to collect those fees from those builders essentially. And so we don't meet that test, which means we don't meet the other two as well. But that is something that we are continually monitoring, working with the city and both counties on making sure that if and when we do qualify, that we access those dollars. So great question. Any questions from folks that are sitting here?
I have a question.
Yes.
So wellness and mental health are just top of mind for all the teens and younger children. So when you break out in that wheel, I think counseling services. So what percent of the whole pie is going to be allocated to help kids' well-being and counseling?
Right.
Not just nurses, but
Right.
really mental health.
Right, counseling as well. So to your point, both nurses and counselors attend to the mental health of our students, and I think a lot would argue that teachers and paraeducators do the very same thing. Even somebody serving lunch can serve that role. And because that work is done by many individuals, we don't have a percent on that per se. But what I can tell you is that the state underfunds us in that 76% for those services to about 50% of what we require. So for example, if we needed 23, 24 individuals across the system, that being nurses and counselors and other mental health support staff, we get about half of what we need from the state, and the levy provides that other half. Good point. Any other questions? Yes.
So this levy is to just continue what the community has done for the last.
Yes. Yep.
For another 4 years.
Yep. The question was, is this levy asking the community to continue what they have already approved? And the answer is yes. And not only for the next 4 years, but at the same rate we expect it to be from the previous years, and lower than what it has been in the past.
Follow-up question.
Yes.
Do you expect it to go? I saw the numbers show that it increases. Is that due to anticipated property value?
Yes, it is increase in property values and also increasing enrollment. Yep. And so as we have more individuals living in the community, more individuals that own property, everybody contributes less. And I think it's also good, and you didn't ask this, but just to point out that again, the voters approve a fixed amount. So whether property values go up or down, we never collect more than what the voters approve, which is that large, 16 million. Question?
Not just the increase in our home, but the increase of all the new homes.
Yes.
Coming in.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Yep. So when we're talking about levies specifically, building in the community and growing the community benefits us from a tax perspective because we pay less. Yes.
So this levy doesn't go into effect until 2025.
Correct.
So whatever I'm assessed in 2025 is what it's based on.
Correct.
For.
Yes. Yeah.
This year my house went up $200,000.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And again, as those property values go up, what you contribute goes down. Yep,
Because
to the levy.
get the dollar.
As an individual.
Yes.
Just wish they keep building more houses where I live.
Another question, Evan?
But I got
rough percentage-wise, how much of the administration is funded by the state, how much is funded by the levy?
Right. Well, what we can say is that, and that might be an interesting thing to add to this, but we know that of all of our funds, so if we braid together our state funding, our federal funding, and our levy funding, administrative costs comprise 4% of that. Usually what happens is portions of an individual are funded by the levy and portions of an individual are funded through the state. And that simply is because the state underfunds. And so, an individual that might be doing work in technology or might be doing work associated with librarians, we could fund part of that individual with levy dollars. So 4% of all funds administrative. Yes.
Cybersecurity is, and threats are definitely top of mind, many nonprofits and schools. It seems like the technology allocation of only 5 is low when you think about the risk and liability this poses.
Yeah.
What are some of the counter programs that you're thinking about in order to really stay ahead of this? It's real.
Yeah.
Sure. I'm happy to talk about that. And you can see here we have the state would fund 2.5 staff across our system. And thankfully, we have very skilled technology staff that are looking ahead and looking out for cybersecurity, both for students, staff, and for our servers and network as well. So that is part of the work that they do. We have about 4,600 student devices, about close to 1,000 staff devices that are out in buildings. And so when we look at that many devices alone and protecting them and the network, it's a large job. We work to make sure that we are using the best practices within the technology standards to maintain our security, both in on our server end, on our network end, and for students who are they're digital natives, but they're first-time users often.
Are you getting enough support from the Microsofts, the Amazons, and the Googles of the world who really are getting funded very well in terms of capabilities?
We're a Google platform district, and so Google has many built-in safety features for students and staff, and we monitor consistently. We have the ability now for our staff to monitor student use and what's coming in and out of the district. Yeah.
When I add up that last column right there, and that probably about 15% of your staff is funded by the local levy.
Yes, and so the question was, does this comprise about 15% of staff? Yes, and this is just a representative sample. So this table does not include all levy-funded positions. These were just ones that we chose to pull out for examples tonight. So I would say it's probably greater than that. Any other questions? All right, well, if you do have questions later on, feel free to go to our website. We've got information there. We are also on social media platforms, and there's a QR code here that will take you straight to our district website. So please don't hesitate to reach out at any time, whether it's by email or through social media. We love to answer questions and get as much information out. As like Ryan said, we want to really avoid any situations where someone would have said, gosh, if I'd only known that information, that would have factored into my decision making. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.